Hi.
Hi. In listening to you over the last 2 days, and being aware of my sort of expanding consciousness, I find that children keep coming into my mind. I have 3.
You have 3 children?
3. I look around the room and I see we're all adults. Of course, there are no children here. But the question that keeps coming up is, what about the children?
Good question.
So, you said you look down at an infant and they're pure, but as they experience the world, they become less and less pure.
Well, they develop more and more mind.
Right,
Yeah.
and as the world sort of comes down on top of them,
Yes.
I can see the process
Yes.
of them getting more and more stuck.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
See, I think the most powerful thing that we do for children, that anybody can do for children, is how we see them. Literally, how we see them. How we see them is very, very important because children pick up on how we see them, how we view them. The quality of our own perception, the quality of our consciousness, literally how do we see them? I mean, do we see them as what they really are? Do we see them as being, primarily and fundamentally, as pure being, as everything and everybody is pure being? Or are we seeing them even as, of course, your children, that's obvious also, but are we seeing them as being, that is also your child, or your child, my child, who has being? Do you see where are we? Because the most important thing that's very underestimated is we, even you and I and anybody in this room with anybody, we connect unspoken, consciousness to consciousness, instantaneously. Everybody does. And we're actually, there's in either a silent, unspoken acknowledgement or denial of the truth of our being in that connection. Many people, most people probably aren't even aware that this is happening, but it is happening. And it has a very deep and profound effect, especially as we grow up. And I think, certainly as parents, the greatest gift is to have some connection with that unspoken connection. Almost like that little, I remember when my grandfather, who used to tell lots of he told nothing but tall tales, and never told us that they were tall tales, but he enjoyed it immensely. When I was in my mid-20s, I suddenly realized he was telling us tall tales, and I said, "Grandpa, did that really happen?" And he just winked and smiled. And that was his way of saying, "You got me. Now you know." And then he went right on telling tall tales. But now we knew, right? We knew then. And so we shared something. And that wink, I think, is something, not that you're going to wink at your child necessarily, but that was like an acknowledgement, like, I know something. We met there in a certain truth, right? And I think with anybody, children or adults, is when we see each other for what we essentially are, primarily. And then as we appear to be, secondarily. But that's almost like my grandfather winking at me. Like, yeah. It's almost like saying without saying, I see you. I know what you are. I see you. Whether we say it or not, I see you.
And that will carry them through so they don't end up going through the same process.
They'll probably go through it anyway.
Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, but it keeps something alive in them. It keeps something, it's very powerful. It keeps something alive that when the time is right, when it's time for them, something will have kept alive in them, and it'll be much more easily accessible. Much more easily accessible. And I think it's important that we don't sort of put a sort of complicated spiritual ideas on our kids, because they don't understand that, and they don't care about any of that either. But oftentimes, I imagine, as you know, with kids, sometimes they'll come up with the most true things. oftentimes the things that they come up with are things that parents don't understand and kind of push away. But often kids will come up. I've had so many people in audiences like this have come up and said, I remember one day, when I was 6 years old and I told my mother I was nobody and she panicked and she told me never to tell anybody that again. It happened, or different things. But it's also possible to affirm, right? You could also say, of course, honey, what's that like? Tell me about it. Just these ways of keeping sort of this light alive. In each other too. Children, adults, whatever we are. I think we all play an important part in sort of keeping this light that we are, really keeping it alive by not tramping it down, and you know what I mean. But we seem to be, most of us, we seem to go through this trajectory of maturation, and it seems to be, although who knows, it seems to be sort of a very natural progression to develop an ego and a sense of self and a sense of, here I am and here I stand. And later that sense helps your children break away from you. And this is me and that's you. If a child never gets to me and you, they don't break away and they are very unhealthy, in the end. So a lot of this, I think, is a natural maturation. As my teacher said, enlightenment's just continuing the maturation process. That was her view of it. It's not something special and mystical and woo-woo. It's just most people that get to be adulthood, they never get beyond it. In fact, most people never actually get to real mature adulthood. There's somewhere between adolescence and adulthood, But I think when we see it in this light, someone can go through that process of developing their ego and their self and, a healthy false sense of self is a better thing than an unhealthy false sense of self. And then they'll mature out of it. They'll mature out of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I think we are so convinced that we influence each other predominantly through what we say, and that's really important. What we say and what we do is extraordinarily important. What we do is much more important than what we say. But what we don't understand is how much we influence each other through the quality of our own consciousness. And that is very, very, very powerful. Very, very powerful, actually. Much more than most people recognize.